The darkness of the root cellar had become Nora Blackwood's entire world. 3 weeks had passed since her husband Xavier's sudden death from fever, and his parents had wasted no time in showing their true colors. The musty air filled her lungs as she huddled against the earthen wall, straining to hear any movement above. Her father-in-law had dragged her down here after she'd refused to sign over Xavier's land, claimed the only thing of value she had left in this unforgiving territory. It was 1876 in the Montana Territory, and at 22 years old, Nora had already weathered more hardship than most faced in a lifetime. Orphaned at 16, she'd married Xavier at 18, following him west with dreams of building something beautiful together. Now those dreams lay as cold as his body in the ground. A sliver of light appeared as the cellar door creaked open. Nora shielded her eyes, expecting to see Martha Blackwood's pinched face, bringing the daily meager ration of food and water. Instead, heavy boots descended the rickety stairs. "You'll sign the papers today," Gerald Blackwood's voice boomed in the small space. "I've brought the notary. You've had enough time to think about your situation." Nora struggled to her feet, her legs weak from days of confinement. "I told you, Mr. Blackwood. That land was Xavier's dream, our dream. I won't sign it away." The back of Gerald's hand connected with her cheek before she could react. The force sent her stumbling back against the shelves of preserved goods. A jar crashed to the floor. "Ungrateful girl," he snarled. "Our son married beneath him, and this is how you repay our kindness. That land belongs to the Blackwood family. You have no right to it." "The deed has my name on it too," Nora said, tasting blood on her lip. "Xavier wanted it that way." "He knew," she stopped herself from finishing the thought. "He knew what kind of people you really are." Gerald grabbed her arm, his fingers digging painfully into her flesh. "The notary is waiting. You'll sign or you'll never see daylight again." He dragged her toward the stairs, but Nora planted her feet, summoning what little strength remained in her body. "No." The single word seemed to echo in the cellar. Gerald's face contorted with rage. He shoved her hard and Nora fell, hitting her head against the dirt floor. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard him storming up the stairs. "Let her rot another week," he called to someone above. "She'll be more reasonable then." The door slammed shut, plunging her back into darkness. Tears welled in Nora's eyes as she touched her bruised cheek. Xavier had been nothing like his parents. Kind, gentle Xavier, whose dreams had seemed so possible when they'd stood together on that beautiful stretch of land along the creek. Now she wondered if she would die in this root cellar, forgotten by everyone except the 2 people who hated her most. Hours passed, or perhaps days' time blurred in the darkness. Nora dozed fitfully, startling awake at every creak of the house above. When she heard the pounding, at first she thought it was just her heartbeat thundering in her ears, but the sound grew louder, more insistent. Voices raised in argument filtered through the floorboards. Then came a tremendous crash that shook dust from the cellar's ceiling. Heavy footsteps crossed the floor above, followed by more shouting. Nora pressed herself against the wall, unsure if whatever was happening meant salvation or further danger. The cellar door was flung open with such force that it splintered on its hinges. Light flooded the space, silhouetting a tall figure on the stairs. Nora raised a hand to shield her eyes, heart hammering in her chest. "Mrs. Blackwood." A deep voice called, not Gerald's voice, not anyone she recognized. The figure descended the stairs quickly, and as her eyes adjusted, Nora saw a man unlike any she'd encountered in the small town of Pine Ridge. Tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that brushed his collar. His clothes were trail-worn, but the badge pinned to his vest caught the light. He knelt before her, eyes widening at her condition. "My name's Xander Burke. I'm the new marshal in these parts." His gaze took in her bruised face, the dirt-stained dress, her matted hair. Something dangerous flashed in his expression. "Who did this to you?" "My in-laws," Nora whispered, her voice hoarse from disuse. "They want Xavier's land." The marshal's jaw tightened as he shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. "Can you stand?" Nora nodded, though she wasn't entirely sure. When she tried to rise, her legs trembled violently. Without hesitation, Marshal Burke scooped her into his arms as if she weighed nothing. "Come with me," he said, his voice gentler than she would have expected from such a formidable man. "You're safe now." As he carried her up the stairs, Nora saw the Blackwoods' kitchen for the first time in weeks. Martha stood by the stove, her face pale with shock. Gerald was nowhere to be seen. "Where is he?" Nora asked, her arms instinctively tightening around the marshal's neck. "Restrained in the wagon outside," Burke answered, his voice hard. "The shopkeeper in town became concerned when you hadn't been seen in weeks. Said it wasn't like you to disappear without a word." That would be Mrs. Winters, Nora thought. The kind older woman who ran the general store had taken a motherly interest in Nora from the day she'd arrived in town. "The Blackwoods told everyone I'd gone back east," Nora said as they stepped outside. The late afternoon sunlight was painfully bright after so many days in darkness. Well, they'll be telling their stories to a judge now. The marshal strode toward a wagon where Gerald sat with his hands bound, a younger man in a deputy's badge watching over him. Nora turned her face away, unable to look at her father-in-law. "Where are you taking me?" "To Doc Miller first," Marshal Burke said. "Then we'll figure out what comes next." He helped her into the wagon, settling her on the bench seat with a gentleness that brought fresh tears to her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, clutching his coat around her shoulders. The marshal's eyes met hers, and something passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits who understood hardship. "No need for thanks, Mrs. Blackwood, just doing my job." But as the wagon pulled away from the house that had become her prison, Nora sensed that Xander Burke's arrival in her life was more than just a lawman performing his duty. It was the first ray of hope she'd felt since they'd lowered Xavier's coffin into the ground. Doctor Miller's examination confirmed what Nora already knew: she was malnourished, dehydrated, and bruised, but would recover with proper care. The doctor's wife, Emma, helped her bathe and provided clean clothes, exclaiming with quiet outrage over the bruises that mapped Nora's skin. "You'll stay with us tonight," Emma insisted, brushing Nora's damp hair. "The spare room is made up." Nora nodded gratefully, though anxiety churned in her stomach. "What will happen to the Blackwoods?" "The marshal has them both in custody," Emma said. "There'll be a hearing before the circuit judge arrives next week. Until then, you're safe here." Safe. The word felt foreign after weeks of fear. Nora wondered if she would ever truly feel safe again. Later that evening, a knock at the Miller's door announced Marshal Burke. He'd cleaned up since their first meeting, his dark hair still damp from washing, wearing a fresh shirt beneath his vest. He removed his hat when Emma showed him into the sitting room where Nora rested on the sofa. "Mrs. Blackwood," he said, his deep voice filling the room. "How are you feeling?" "Better, thank you." Nora sat straighter, suddenly conscious of her borrowed dress and loose hair. "And please call me Nora. She hesitated. "I'm not sure I want to keep the Blackwood name after all this." The marshal nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Nora, then, I'm Xander." Emma Miller quietly excused herself, leaving them alone. Xander settled into the armchair across from Nora, setting his hat on his knee. "I need to ask you some questions about what happened," he said. "Are you up to talking about it now?" Nora steeled herself. "Yes. I want them to face justice for what they did." Over the next hour, she told him everything: Xavier's death, the Blackwoods' initial sympathy that quickly transformed into demands for the land, their rage when she refused to sign it over, and finally, her imprisonment in the root cellar. Xander listened intently, his expression darkening with each detail. Only the whitening of his knuckles on the brim of his hat betrayed his anger. "The land was important to Xavier," Nora explained. "He saw something in those acres that others didn't: potential for a horse ranch unlike any in the territory. We worked that land together for 2 years. I couldn't just give it away, even to his parents." "You don't need to justify yourself," Xander said quietly. "What they did was criminal, plain and simple. But I am curious about this land. Is it valuable?" Nora sighed. There are rumors of silver in the hills beyond the creek, but Xavier never found any. He wasn't interested in mining anyway. He loved horses, had a way with them that was almost magical. A small smile touched her lips at the memory. The land is good for raising them. Sweet grass, clean water, sheltered from the worst winter winds. Xander nodded. I've heard talk in town about survey teams from the mining companies looking for new claims. That might explain the Blackwoods' urgency. They never cared about Xavier's dreams, Nora said bitterly. They just want to sell to the highest bidder. Well, they won't be selling anything from a jail cell, Xander assured her. He hesitated, then added, I looked at the deed records today. Your name is indeed on the property along with your husband's. Legally, the land is yours now. Relief washed over Nora. She hadn't been certain the deed had been properly filed. Thank you for checking. What will you do now? Xander asked, his dark eyes studying her with an intensity that made her heart beat faster. Nora looked down at her hands. I don't know, the ranch was our dream, but I'm not sure I can manage it alone. Don't make any decisions yet, Xander advised. Focus on recovering your strength. The rest will come in time. When he rose to leave, Nora found herself reluctant to see him go. There was something reassuring about his presence, a steadiness she hadn't realized how much she needed. Will I see you again? She asked, then immediately felt foolish for the question. But Xander smiled, the expression transforming his serious face. I'll check on you tomorrow, and I'll need your testimony when the judge arrives. At the door, he turned back. Lock this behind me. Not that you need to worry, I've asked Deputy Lewis to keep watch tonight just in case. The gesture touched her deeply. You're very kind, Marshal, Xander, he corrected gently. And it's not kindness, Nora, it's justice. Sleep well. After he left, Nora turned the key in the lock as instructed, then stood for a long moment with her hand against the door. For the first time since Xavier's death, she felt something other than grief and fear. Something like possibility. 3 days passed before Nora felt strong enough to visit her property. Dr. Miller declared her recovered enough for the journey, but insisted she not stay alone at the ranch house yet. Your body has been through an ordeal, he explained. Best to stay in town a while longer. So it was arranged that Nora would move to a room above Mrs. Winter's store where the older woman could keep a motherly eye on her. But first, she needed to see her home. Xander insisted on accompanying her. The Blackwoods might have friends, he said when she protested that she didn't want to take him from his duties. Until the judge arrives and their case is heard, I'm not taking chances with your safety. They rode out on a clear spring morning, the Montana landscape stretching vast and beautiful around them. The air was fresh with the scent of pine and new growth, and Nora felt her spirits lifting with each mile they traveled. It's not far now, she said as they crested a hill. Just beyond those trees. The land that had been her home with Xavier came into view, 20 acres of gently rolling pasture bordered by pine forest on one side and a clear creek on the other. The small cabin sat near the tree line, and beyond it stood the corral and barn Xavier had built with his own hands. Tears filled Nora's eyes at the sight. I didn't think I'd ever see it again. Xander glanced at her, concern in his expression. We can turn back if this is too difficult. No, Nora said firmly, blinking away the tears. I need to be here. As they approached the cabin, Nora noted with relief that it appeared undisturbed. She had feared the Blackwoods might have ransacked it during her imprisonment, but everything looked just as she had left it weeks ago. Xander tied their horses to the rail and helped Nora down from her mount. His hands lingered at her waist a moment longer than necessary, and a warmth that had nothing to do with the spring sunshine spread through her. Inside the cabin, dust had settled on the furnishings, but otherwise, the home she had made with Xavier remained intact. Nora moved through the rooms, touching familiar objects, reacquainting herself with the life she had nearly lost. Xander remained respectfully by the door. It's a fine place, he said. You and your husband built something good here. We did, Nora agreed, running her hand along the back of a chair Xavier had crafted. But without him. She trailed off, unable to complete the thought. "It must be hard to imagine going forward alone," Xander said quietly. Nora looked up at him, struck by how perfectly he had articulated her feelings. "Yes, exactly that." They moved outside to check the barn and corral. The two horses Xavier had been training had been taken by the Blackwoods, Nora assumed. The reminder of their treachery stung. "I'll find out what happened to them," Xander promised when she told him about the missing animals. They walked to the creek that marked the eastern boundary of the property. Nora had always loved this spot, where the water bubbled over smooth stones and cottonwoods provided dappled shade. "Xavier used to say this was the heart of the place," she said, kneeling to trail her fingers through the cold, clear water. "He would sit here for hours, planning what we would build together." Xander crouched beside her. "He sounds like a good man." He was. Nora watched the water swirl around her fingers. Nothing like his parents, he was kind and gentle and full of dreams. She glanced at Xander. "What about you, Marshal? What brought you to Pine Ridge?" A shadow crossed his face. "I was a lawman in Colorado. There was trouble, a mining company trying to force smaller claims out. Things got ugly. When it was over, I needed a fresh start." The careful way he spoke told Nora there was more to the story, but she didn't press. Everyone had parts of themselves they kept hidden. "Well, I'm grateful you found your fresh start here," she said simply. Their eyes met, and for a moment, something electric passed between them. Xander was the first to look away, clearing his throat as he straightened. "We should head back to town before the light fades," he said, offering his hand to help her up. As they rode back toward Pine Ridge, Nora found herself studying Xander's profile against the setting sun. There was a solidity to him that went beyond his physical strength, a sense of unwavering principle that reminded her of Xavier, yet was entirely different. Xavier had been full of optimism and dreams, sometimes impractical in his enthusiasm. Xander seemed to be a man who had faced the world's harsh realities and emerged not broken, but tempered, like steel forged in fire. "What will you testify against the Blackwoods?" she asked as the town came into view. "The truth," he replied. "That I found you imprisoned and half-starved on their property. That's enough for the judge to take action." "And if it isn't," Xander's expression hardened. "It will be. I promise you that, Nora." The conviction in his voice reassured her. Whatever happened next, she wouldn't face it alone. The circuit judge arrived 4 days later. Judge Franklin Wells was a stern-faced man with a reputation for fairness. The hearing was held in the town's small courthouse, with most of Pine Ridge's residents in attendance. The case had become the talk of the town, with opinions divided. The Blackwoods had been respected members of the community, and some found it hard to believe they could be capable of such cruelty. Nora sat beside Xander at the prosecution table, trying to ignore the whispers and stares. Martha and Gerald Blackwood sat across the aisle, their lawyer between them. Gerald glared at Nora with undisguised hatred, while Martha kept her eyes downcast. When Nora was called to testify, her legs trembled as she approached the witness stand. But once she began speaking, describing the weeks of darkness and fear in the root cellar, her voice grew stronger. She felt Xander's steady gaze on her, lending her strength. "And why do you believe the Blackwoods imprisoned you?" Judge Wells asked. "They wanted my land," Nora said simply. "After my husband died, they demanded I sign it over to them. When I refused, Mr. Blackwood locked me in the cellar and said I would stay there until I agreed." The Blackwoods' lawyer, a slick-talking man named Peterson, tried to paint Nora as confused with grief, suggesting she had voluntarily stayed in the cellar as some sort of mourning ritual. The absurdity of the claim would have been laughable if not for the nodding heads Nora saw among the spectators. But when Xander took the stand, his testimony was damning. He described finding Nora's bruised and malnourished condition in clinical detail. He produced the lock that had been on the cellar door, a heavy iron padlock that could only have been fastened from the outside. And most convincingly, he presented a signed statement from Mrs. Winters, detailing how the Blackwoods had told various contradictory stories about Nora's absence. By the time Dr. Miller testified about Nora's physical condition when she was brought to him, the tide of public opinion had turned decisively. Even those who had known the Blackwoods for years looked at them with new eyes. Judge Wells deliberated for less than an hour before delivering his verdict. Gerald and Martha Blackwood, I find you guilty of false imprisonment and assault. The evidence of your cruelty toward your daughter-in-law following the death of your son is overwhelming and disturbing. The judge's voice was heavy with disapproval. I sentence you both to 2 years in the territorial prison. Additionally, you are prohibited from approaching Mrs. Blackwood or her property upon your release. Relief washed over Nora like a physical wave. Justice had been served, but the victory felt hollow. No punishment could restore the weeks of her life spent in darkness, or erase the betrayal by the family that should have supported her in her grief. As the Blackwoods were led away by Deputy Lewis, Martha finally looked at Nora. There was no remorse in her eyes, only cold resignation. Gerald didn't look back at all. Outside the courthouse, townspeople approached Nora with awkward condolences and expressions of shock about the Blackwoods' actions. Some offered belated help with the ranch. Others admitted they had wondered about her sudden disappearance, but hadn't wanted to intrude. Nora accepted their words with quiet dignity, though inside she wondered where their concern had been when she was fighting for survival. Only when the crowd dispersed did Xander approach. You did well in there, he said. Your testimony was compelling. As was yours, Nora replied. Thank you, Xander. I don't know how I can ever repay you. There's nothing to repay. His eyes held hers. Will you return to your ranch now? The question had been weighing on Nora's mind. I'm not sure, being there yesterday. It feels different without Xavier. Empty. Xander nodded in understanding. Whatever you decide, don't rush. Mrs. Winters is happy to have you stay as long as you need. And what about you? Nora asked impulsively. Will you stay in Pine Ridge now that this case is resolved? Something flickered in his expression, surprise, perhaps, or pleasure at her interest. I took this position permanently. Pine Ridge needs a marshal, and he hesitated. I find I like it here more than I expected to. His words warmed her, though she told herself not to read too much into them. Xander Burke had done his job admirably, nothing more. That he had been kind to her, that his presence made her feel safe and valued, these were natural responses to her ordeal, not indications of anything deeper. Yet as they walked together toward Mrs. Winters' store, Nora couldn't help wondering what might lie ahead for both of them in this small Montana town. Spring blossomed into early summer, and Nora gradually rebuilt her life. She moved back to the ranch, though Mrs. Winters insisted she visit town regularly, so folks don't forget what you look like. The older woman had become a surrogate mother to Nora, offering practical advice and unwavering support. Nora threw herself into working the land, determined to keep Xavier's dream alive. But ranch work was difficult for one person, especially a woman alone. She hired occasional help from town, but finances were tight. Xander visited frequently, ostensibly to check on her safety, though they both knew the Blackwoods posed no threat from prison. His visits became a bright point in Nora's week. Sometimes he brought supplies from town. Other times he simply offered a few hours of labor, helping with repairs to the barn or corral. They fell into an easy companionship, sharing meals and conversation as the summer days lengthened. Nora learned that Xander had been orphaned young, raised by an uncle who taught him to respect the law and protect those who couldn't protect themselves. She told him stories of her childhood in Pennsylvania, of meeting Xavier at a church social, of their journey west. Gradually, Nora began to notice things about Xander that had nothing to do with his role as marshal, the way sunlight brought out amber highlights in his dark eyes, how his rare smile transformed his serious face, the gentleness of his hands despite their strength. She caught herself watching him when he wasn't looking, wondering what it would be like to be held by him. These thoughts brought guilt. Xavier had been dead barely 4 months. Was it disloyal to feel this pull toward another man so soon? Yet in her heart, Nora knew Xavier would not have wanted her to be alone. He had been full of life and love and would have wanted the same for her. On a warm July evening, Xander arrived at the ranch with unexpected news. "I found your horses," he said as they sat on the porch after dinner. "The Blackwoods sold them to a rancher near Helena. I've contacted him, explained the situation. He's willing to return them for the price he paid." Nora's heart leapt at the prospect of recovering the animals Xavier had so lovingly trained. "That's wonderful, but—" She hesitated. "I don't have that kind of money right now." Xander seemed to have anticipated this. "I thought perhaps we could work something out. The town council has approved funds for a proper stable for the marshal's office. Those horses of yours, Xavier, trained them for ranch work, yes. But they'd make fine mounts for law enforcement too." "Are you proposing a trade?" Nora asked, intrigued. "More of a partnership," Xander said carefully. "I secure the return of your horses, you train them and others for the marshal's office. The town pays you a fair price for each animal." The proposal was practical, beneficial to both sides. Yet Nora sensed there was more to Xander's offer than business. "Why are you doing this?" she asked softly. Xander looked out over the land, his profile strong against the setting sun. "Because you deserve a chance to make this place what you and Xavier dreamed it could be." He turned to her, his expression open and vulnerable in a way she'd never seen before. "And because I care what happens to you, Nora." The simple declaration hung in the air between them. Nora's heart raced. "I care what happens to you too," she admitted. Their eyes held for a long moment before Xander looked away, clearing his throat. "So do we have a deal?" "We do," Nora agreed, extending her hand to seal the arrangement. When Xander's large hand closed around hers, she felt the contact like a current running through her body. He held on a moment longer than necessary, his thumb brushing lightly over her knuckles before releasing her. That touch, brief as it was, changed something between them. A threshold had been crossed, though neither acknowledged it aloud. The horses arrived 2 weeks later. Nora wept when she saw them again, two handsome geldings, one bay and one dapple gray that Xavier had raised from colts. They remembered her, nickering softly when she approached. "They look well cared for," Xander observed as the horses settled into their old stalls. "The rancher must have treated them kindly," Nora agreed, stroking the bay's velvet nose. "I was afraid they might have suffered." "I made sure of his reputation before contacting him," Xander admitted. "I wouldn't have brought them back to you otherwise." The thoughtfulness of this gesture touched Nora deeply. Xander had considered not just the practical aspects of recovering the horses, but the emotional impact on her as well. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "This means more than I can say." As summer progressed, their partnership flourished. Word spread about the arrangement between the marshal and the widow Blackwood, and other law enforcement officers from nearby settlements began inquiring about horses. Nora's natural affinity for the animals, combined with Xavier's training methods that she had absorbed over their years together, produced mounts that were reliable, responsive, and hardy, exactly what was needed in the often harsh conditions of the territory. With each success, Nora's confidence grew. The grief that had threatened to consume her after Xavier's death didn't disappear, but it changed, becoming a bittersweet memory rather than a crushing weight. She began to see a future for herself that honored his memory while creating something new. And always, there was Xander. He remained respectful of her status as a recent widow, never pressing for more than friendship. But Nora wasn't blind to the way his eyes followed her, or how he found reasons to extend his visits to the ranch. For her part, she looked forward to his arrivals with an anticipation that grew stronger each time. The turning point came in late August. Nora had spent the day breaking a spirited mare that a rancher from the next county had brought for assessment. The horse was challenging but promising, and by evening, Nora was exhausted but satisfied with their progress. She was brushing down the mare when she heard a rider approaching. Expecting Xander, who had mentioned he might stop by, she stepped out of the barn with a smile. But it wasn't the marshal who dismounted in her yard. It was a stranger, a well-dressed man with a city polish that looked out of place in the rural setting. He removed his hat, revealing thinning hair and a calculating expression. "Mrs. Blackwood?" he inquired. "I'm Lawrence Wilson, representing Montana Mining Consolidated." Nora's guard immediately rose. "What can I do for you, Mr. Wilson?" "I'll be direct, Mrs. Blackwood. Our survey teams have reason to believe there are valuable mineral deposits on your property. My company would like to make you an offer for the land." So the rumors about silver were true, Nora thought. That explained the Blackwoods' desperate attempts to gain control of the property. "I'm not interested in selling," she said firmly. Wilson named a figure that momentarily took her breath away. It was more money than she had ever imagined possessing. "That's a generous offer," she acknowledged, "but this land isn't just property to me, it's my home and my livelihood." "A woman alone can't possibly manage a ranch of this size," Wilson said dismissively. "Be practical, Mrs. Blackwood. This offer won't remain open indefinitely." His condescending tone sparked anger in Nora. "I'm managing quite well, Mr. Wilson, and as I said, the ranch is not for sale." Wilson's pleasant facade slipped, revealing something harder beneath. "I'd advise you to reconsider. Things happen to isolated properties, accidents, vandalism. It would be a shame if what exactly?" Xander's voice cut through the tension as he rode into the yard. He dismounted in one fluid motion, his hand resting casually near his holstered revolver. Wilson quickly reassessed the situation. "Marshal, I was just having a business discussion with Mrs. Blackwood." "Sounded more like a threat to me," Xander said coldly. "I suggest you leave now, Mr. Wilson, before our conversation becomes official." The mining representative hesitated only briefly before replacing his hat. "Think about my offer, Mrs. Blackwood. I'll call again when you've had time to consider it properly." As Wilson rode away, Nora released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "Thank you. His timing was unsettling just as I'm finally getting the ranch on solid footing." Xander's expression was troubled. "This isn't over. Mining companies don't give up easily when they want land." "I won't sell," Nora said firmly, "not after everything that's happened." "I know," Xander's voice softened. "And I'll help you protect what's yours, Nora, I promise you that." The sincerity in his words warmed her. "I believe you," she said simply. That evening they sat on the porch as had become their custom, watching darkness settle over the land. The conversation flowed easily between them, touching on the day's work, the mining company's interest, the progress of the horses. As night deepened, a comfortable silence fell. Stars appeared overhead, brilliantly clear in the Montana sky. Nora was acutely aware of Xander beside her, his presence both reassuring and exhilarating. "I should go," he said eventually, though he made no move to leave. "It's getting late." "Stay," Nora said impulsively. At his startled look, she clarified, "In the spare room, it's a long ride back to town in the dark." Xander hesitated, and Nora wondered if she had overstepped, but then he nodded. "Thank you, that would be sensible." Later, after she had shown him to the small room that had once been intended as a nursery, Nora lay awake in her own bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of another person moving about her home. There was comfort in it, but also a nervous anticipation that made sleep elusive. In the morning, she found Xander had risen before her and started coffee. The domesticity of the scene, this strong, capable man moving comfortably in her kitchen, stirred something deep within her. "I hope I didn't wake you," he said, when he noticed her watching from the doorway. "No," Nora assured him. "I always rise with the sun, ranch habits." They shared breakfast, and Nora was struck by how natural it felt, as if they had done this 100 times before. When it was time for Xander to leave, she walked with him to where his horse was tethered. "Thank you for your hospitality," he said formally, though his eyes held warmth that belied the stiffness of his words. "You're welcome here any time, Xander," Nora replied. "I mean that," he nodded, seeming on the verge of saying something more. Instead, he mounted his horse and tipped his hat to her before riding away. Nora watched until he disappeared from view, a curious mixture of contentment and longing filling her heart. The mining company was indeed persistent. Over the next few weeks, Wilson returned twice more, each time increasing his offer for the land. Nora remained resolute in her refusal. Then came the incidents small at first: a section of fence damaged, a water trough overturned. Nothing definitive that could be tied to Montana mining consolidated, but the timing was suspicious. Xander increased his patrols near the ranch, often staying late into the evening. On one such night, after checking the property boundaries, they sat by the fireplace as a rare autumn storm lashed the cabin with wind and rain. "I can't prove it's Wilson's people," Xander said, frustration evident in his voice. "But these aren't random acts of mischief. What can we do?" Nora asked. The incidents had been escalating and she'd begun to fear for her safety when alone on the property. Xander stared into the fire, his profile strong in the flickering light. "I've written to the territorial governor about the mining company's tactics, until I hear back, I think." He hesitated, then met her eyes directly. "I think you should consider staying in town for a while. Leave the ranch." The idea was painful to contemplate. That would be giving in. "Not giving in being strategic," Xander countered, "just until we can ensure your safety here." Nora shook her head stubbornly. "This is my home, Xander. I won't be driven from it." "Then I'll stay," he said simply. The declaration hung in the air between them. "You can't abandon your duties in town," Nora protested. "Deputy Lewis is capable of handling things for a few days," Xander said. "Your safety matters more than routine patrols." The conviction in his voice silenced her objections. And truthfully, the prospect of having Xander's protection eased the fear that had been her constant companion since the incidents began. "Thank you," she said softly. Outside, the storm intensified, rain drumming against the roof and windows. Inside, the atmosphere between them seemed to change, charged with an awareness that had been building for months. "Nora," Xander began, his voice rougher than usual, "there's something I need to say." She looked at him, heart suddenly racing. "Yes, these past months, getting to know you, seeing your strength and determination." He paused, searching for words. "I've developed feelings for you that go beyond friendship or professional concern." Though she had sensed this was coming, hearing him say it aloud made Nora's breath catch. "I have feelings for you too," she admitted. "But I'm not sure if it's right so soon after Xavier." Xander nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I know, and I would never rush you or dishonor your grief. I just wanted you to know where I stand." "Where do you stand exactly?" Nora asked, needing to hear him define his intentions. "I care for you deeply," Xander said, meeting her gaze steadily. "If there comes a time when you're ready to consider a future with someone new, I hope you'll consider me." The sincerity in his words touched her deeply. "You're a good man, Xander Burke." "Not always," he said with a rueful smile, "but I try to be the man you deserve." The storm outside matched the tumult of emotions within Nora. Part of her wanted to throw caution aside, to acknowledge the growing attraction between them. Another part held back, honoring the memory of her first love. "I need time," she finally said. "You have it," Xander assured her, "however much you need." The moment was interrupted by a loud crash from outside. Xander was on his feet instantly, hand going to his holstered revolver. "Stay here," he ordered, moving to the window to peer into the stormy darkness. "What is it?" Nora asked, rising to join him. Before he could answer, a flicker of orange light illuminated the yard. "Fire," Xander said grimly. "In the barn." Horror seized Nora. "The horses!" They rushed outside into the driving rain. The barn door stood open and flames were visible inside, spreading rapidly despite the storm. The horses' panicked whinnies spurred them forward. "I'll get the animals," Xander shouted over the storm. "You get the buckets from the pump house." Nora raced to follow his instructions, terror lending her speed. By the time she returned with buckets and a hand pump, Xander had managed to lead 4 of the 6 horses to safety. They stood huddled and frightened in the rain as he disappeared back into the smoke-filled building for the remaining two. The next minutes were a blur of desperate activity. Neighbors from the nearest farms arrived, drawn by the glow of the fire against the night sky. A bucket brigade formed, fighting to contain the flames before they could spread to the cabin or the surrounding grassland. When the last ember was finally extinguished, Nora stood in the mud, soaked to the skin, surveying the damage. Half the barn was destroyed, though the sturdy log construction had prevented a total loss. Miraculously, all the horses had been saved, though one had suffered burns that would require treatment. As the neighbors departed with promises to return in the morning to help with repairs, Nora sought out Xander. She found him tending to the injured horse, his face grim in the lantern light. "This was deliberate," he said without preamble. "I found a broken lantern by the hay storage. Someone meant for this whole place to burn." Cold fury replaced the shock that had sustained Nora through the crisis. "Wilson," she said flatly. "Almost certainly," Xander agreed. "Though proving it will be difficult." "I won't sell," Nora said, her voice steel. "Not now. Not ever." Xander straightened, wincing slightly. It was only then that Nora noticed the angry red burn on his forearm where his sleeve had been rolled back. "You're hurt," she exclaimed, reaching for him instinctively. "It's nothing," he tried to dismiss, but Nora was already leading him toward the cabin. Inside, she sat him at the kitchen table and retrieved the medical supplies Dr. Miller had provided for the ranch. As she carefully cleaned and bandaged the burn, their earlier conversation seemed to hover in the air between them. "You could have been killed," Nora said softly, her fingers gentle on his skin. "So could you," Xander replied. "Which is why you can't stay here alone anymore, Nora." "Not until this situation is resolved." Too exhausted to argue, Nora nodded. "I'll go to town tomorrow. Mrs. Winters will take me in again, I'm sure." "And I'll find whoever did this," Xander promised, his voice hard with determination. When she finished bandaging his arm, Nora didn't immediately step away. Instead, moved by an impulse she didn't try to analyze, she leaned forward and pressed her lips gently to his. The kiss was brief, a whisper of contact, but it sent warmth spreading through her body despite her sodden clothes and exhaustion. When she pulled back, Xander's eyes were wide with surprise. "What was that for?" he asked hoarsely. "For saving my horses," Nora said. "For risking your life. For being here when I needed you most." Xander's hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch tentative as if she might break or disappear. "I'll always be here when you need me," he said, "for as long as you want me to be." In that moment, with rain still dripping from her hair and the smell of smoke clinging to their clothes, Nora knew with sudden clarity that what she felt for Xander Burke was not merely gratitude or comfort in a time of crisis. It was something deeper, something with the potential to heal the broken places inside her. "I think," she said slowly, "that might be a very long time." The smile that spread across Xander's face was like sunrise after the darkest night. This time when they kissed, there was nothing tentative about it. His arms encircled her, drawing her against the solid warmth of his chest, and Nora felt as if she had finally found her way home after a long, difficult journey. The following weeks brought significant changes. True to her word, Nora moved temporarily to town, taking a room above Mrs. Winters' store while Xander investigated the barn fire. The evidence against Wilson and Montana Mining Consolidated was circumstantial, but compelling enough for Judge Wells, when he next visited Pine Ridge, to issue a restraining order against the company and its representatives. More significantly, the territorial governor responded to Xander's letter with unexpected vigor. It seemed Montana Mining had been using similar tactics throughout the territory, and the governor was eager to make an example of them. A special investigator arrived from Helena, and within a month, Lawrence Wilson was arrested on multiple charges of intimidation and property destruction. With the immediate threat removed, Nora returned to her ranch, accompanied by a group of townspeople who had volunteered to help rebuild the damaged barn. The community that had once viewed her with suspicion as the outsider who had married Xander Blackwood now embraced her as one of their own. Through it all, her relationship with Xander deepened. They moved slowly, respectful of her recent widowhood and the gossip it might generate. In public, they maintained a proper distance. In private, they discovered the joy of sharing their hopes, fears, and dreams with someone who truly understood. On Christmas Eve, 6 months after Xavier's death, Xander asked Nora to marry him. They stood on the porch of her cabin, watching snow drift gently onto the land that had become the center of both their lives. "I know it hasn't been a full year of mourning," he said, taking her hands in his. "If you want to wait, I'll understand, but I love you, Nora. I want to build a life with you, right here on this land that means so much to both of us." Nora looked up at him, this man who had rescued her from darkness in more ways than one. "Xavier would want me to be happy," she said softly. "And you, Xander Burke, make me happier than I ever thought I could be again." "Is that a yes?" he asked, a rare playfulness in his expression. "It's a yes," Nora confirmed, rising on tiptoe to seal the promise with a kiss. They were married in the spring, when wildflowers dotted the meadows of the ranch. Mrs. Winters insisted on hosting the celebration, declaring that the couple had earned every bit of happiness they could find. "After what those awful Blackwoods put you through," the older woman said as she helped Nora prepare for the ceremony, "you deserve a lifetime of joy." The ranch flourished under their combined care. Xander continued as marshal but delegated more responsibilities to Deputy Lewis, allowing him to spend more time helping with the horse breeding and training business that became the backbone of their livelihood. Word spread about the quality of their horses, and buyers came from as far as Denver and San Francisco. The dream that Xavier had envisioned a ranch known throughout the territory for exceptional horses became reality, though in a way he could never have anticipated. One evening, a year after their wedding, Nora and Xander sat on the porch of their expanded cabin, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in brilliant oranges and purples. Nora's hand rested on her slightly rounded belly, where their first child grew. "I never thought I would find this kind of happiness again," she said, leaning against her husband's shoulder. "After Xavier died, after what his parents did, I thought that part of my life was over." Xander's arm tightened around her. "When I broke down that cellar door and saw you there, something changed in me. I'd been running from my past for so long, never staying in one place long enough to put down roots. But in that moment, I knew I would do whatever it took to keep you safe." Nora smiled, remembering that day that seemed both recent and a lifetime ago. "Come with me," you said, and I did. "Best decision I ever made, asking you to come with me," Xander said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Best decision I ever made, saying yes," Nora replied. As darkness settled over the land they both loved, Nora reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the darkness of that root cellar to the light of their shared life, it had been a path marked by both tragedy and joy. The scars of the past remained Xavier's memory, honored in the success of the ranch, the Blackwoods' betrayal, a reminder of the darkness humans were capable of. But those scars were now part of a larger tapestry, one woven with threads of love, trust, and hope for the future. A future that included the child they would welcome in the autumn, the horses that carried their reputation across the territory, and each other, two people who had found in one another the strength to overcome the past and embrace tomorrow. "I love you," Nora whispered as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. "And I love you," Xander replied, his voice carrying the same certainty it had on the day he'd promised to help her protect what was hers. What was theirs now, this land, this life, this love that had bloomed in the most unlikely of circumstances. From the darkest confinement to the widest freedom, Nora had found her way home, not to a place but to a person. To Xander, who had broken down more than just a cellar door when he entered her life. He had broken through the walls grief had built around her heart, letting light and love flood back in. As they sat together in the gathering dusk, Nora knew with bone-deep certainty that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together. Just as they had from that first moment when a brave marshal had extended his hand to a frightened widow and said those simple words that had changed everything. "Come with me," and she had. 5 years later, the Blackwood Burke Ranch had become one of the most successful horse breeding operations in the Montana Territory. Nora and Xander's reputation for quality and fair dealing had spread far beyond Pine Ridge, bringing customers from across the expanding western frontier. Their family had grown as well. 4-year-old Emma, named after Dr. Miller's kind wife, had her mother's auburn hair and her father's steady determination. 2-year-old James tottered after his sister with unwavering dedication, his chubby legs carrying him on countless adventures around the ranch. On a warm summer evening, Nora stood in the doorway of their home, watching Xander teach Emma to brush one of the gentler mares. The little girl's face was a study in concentration as she carefully mimicked her father's movements, her small hand dwarfed by the brush. "Like this, Papa?" Emma asked, looking up at Xander with adoration. "That's perfect, sweetheart," he praised, his hand gently guiding hers. "Nice and slow, just how she likes it." The sight warmed Nora's heart. Xander had taken to fatherhood with the same quiet competence he brought to everything, his natural protectiveness softened by a tenderness that continued to surprise and delight her. James tugged at Nora's skirt, demanding to be included. She lifted him onto her hip, smiling as he pointed excitedly at the horse and his family. "Yes, that's Papa and Emma," she confirmed. "Shall we join them?" As they crossed the yard, Nora reflected on how completely her life had transformed from those dark days in the root cellar. The Blackwoods had been released from prison 2 years ago and had left the territory without attempting contact. The last Nora had heard, they had settled in Oregon, far from the memories of their son and the daughter-in-law they had so cruelly mistreated. Occasionally, Nora still thought of Xavier with a gentle sadness. She kept a small photograph of him in a drawer, not hidden exactly, but private, a remembrance of the first man she had loved and lost. Xander understood this need to honor the past while embracing the present. It was one of the countless reasons she loved him more deeply with each passing day. "Mama," Emma called, spotting her approach. "Look, I'm helping Papa with Daisy." "I see that," Nora replied, setting James down to toddle toward his father. "You're becoming quite the horsewoman." Xander scooped up his son with one arm, settling the boy securely against his chest. "James wants to help too, don't you, partner?" The family spent the evening together with the horses, the children's laughter ringing across the pasture as the sun began its descent behind the mountains. Later, after the little ones were tucked into bed with stories and kisses, Nora and Xander sat on the porch that had become their favorite place for quiet conversation. "I had a letter from that cavalry officer today," Xander said, taking Nora's hand in his. "He wants 10 horses for his new post in Wyoming Territory." 10, Nora's eyes widened. "That's our largest order yet," Xander nodded, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "I told him we could deliver by the end of summer. It will mean hard work, but the payment would allow us to build that new stable we've been planning." "And hire another hand," Nora added. With the children demanding more of her time, she had been finding it difficult to maintain her previous level of involvement with the horses. "Already thinking ahead of me," Xander said with admiration. "That's why we make such a good team." Nora leaned against his shoulder, contentment washing over her. "Do you ever think about how differently things might have turned out? If you hadn't become Marshal of Pine Ridge, if you hadn't heard about the strange disappearance of Xavier Blackwood's widow?" "I try not to dwell on what might have been," Xander admitted, "but I do thank God every day that I found you in time." "As do I," Nora said softly. The memory of those dark days had faded but never disappeared entirely. Sometimes she still woke from nightmares of being trapped, alone and forgotten. On those nights, Xander would hold her close until the fear subsided, his steady presence a reminder that she was safe, loved, free. "I've been thinking," Xander said after a comfortable silence had stretched between them. "Now that the children are getting older and the business is thriving, perhaps we could take a trip next spring. Visit that horse auction in St. Louis you've been reading about." The suggestion surprised and delighted Nora. "Really? You think we could manage it?" "With proper planning, yes. Mrs. Winters has been hinting that she'd love to have the children stay with her for a couple of weeks. And Deputy Lewis has proven himself capable of handling town matters in my absence." The prospect of traveling beyond the boundaries of the territory, of seeing new places at Xander's side, filled Nora with excitement. "I'd like that very much." Xander smiled, lifting her hand to press a kiss against her palm. "Then we'll make it happen." As night deepened around them, Nora reflected on the journey that had brought them to this peaceful moment. From the desperate young widow trapped in darkness to the confident woman and mother she had become. From the solitary lawman with a troubled past to the devoted husband and father beside her. They had built something beautiful together on this land, a home, a family, a legacy. "I love you," she said simply, the words carrying years of shared experiences, challenges overcome, joys celebrated. "And I love you," Xander replied, drawing her closer. In the distance, a coyote called to its mate, the sound echoing across the Montana night. Inside the sturdy cabin, their children slept peacefully. And on the porch, Nora and Xander sat together, two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed: second chances, healing, and a love that had begun with a broken door and 5 simple words. "Come with me." Words that had led Nora from the darkest confinement to the freedom of a life filled with purpose and love. Words that had changed everything. Come with me. And she had. And she would, again and again, choosing this man and this life with every sunrise, with every challenge faced together, with every quiet moment like this one where the vast Montana sky spread above them like a blanket of stars, promising tomorrow and all the tomorrows after.